Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to a webinar discussion on lessons from education response to COVID-19 in Sindh Education for Non-State Actors program. My name is Anam Bashir, and today I'll be moderating this discussion. The Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office supported SENSA program has been providing primary education to over 52,000 of Sindh's poorest children since 2016, and the project is now drawing to a close. SENSA's implementing organizations include HANDS, the Citizens Foundation, and the Family Education Services Foundation. Oxford Policy Management is providing technical assistance and third-party monitoring. Oxford Policy Management has conducted several experience-sharing workshops under the SENSA program, and today we are hosting the fourth such event. We will begin this webinar discussion with opening remarks from OPM Pakistan's Country Director, Mr. Rauf Khan Gandapur. We will then invite Mr. Faisal Khan and Mr. Umar Naeem to give a snapshot of the SENSA program. This will be followed by a discussion of the Distance Learning Response Plan of SENSA's partner organizations.
So on behalf of OPM and FCDO, I would like to welcome partner NGOs, HANDS and FECF, development partners and other stakeholders for attending the webinar. I would especially like to welcome Mona Shamsuddin, the Deputy Head of Mission in Karachi, who has been a great support to the program. I would also like to congratulate Richard, the Executive Director of FESF, just to let everybody know that Richard has been awarded Sitara-e-Khidmat by the President of Pakistan on the 23rd of March. A very well-deserved award, and we are all so proud of you, Richard, and FECF for doing such a great job.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So now that we have come to the end of SENSA, and this has been a journey that we made over the years, I think all of us can be satisfied of the fact that we contributed to educate the most marginalized section of the society and delivered a high-quality program which resulted in improving out-of-school children attendance and learning outcomes in Sindh. While Faisal, Aisha and others from the partner organizations will let you know about the technical nuances of the program, from my SENSA has been a great example of success because there are so many moving parts which work seamlessly together, and that was possible because of 2-3 factors. One was open communication, sound leadership by FCDO, earlier deferred, and most of all, the dedication of people working in all organizations. Everybody believed in this fact and everybody wanted this to happen. History of SENSA has been filled with unique challenges and achievements for us. But I would like to mention one in particular, and it's not that difficult to guess, and that's the COVID-19 time. Teaching kids in COVID-19 time and the ability that SENSA could pivot the program for distance learning, I believe it's a huge achievement. Especially, we should keep in mind the fact that students, they don't come from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. And that learning can be replicated elsewhere also. Given my country director's head, let me say a few words about OPM also. My OPM 101, and everyone who comes to my office have to endure it. So OPM is a management consulting firm that enables low and middle income governments to bring about lasting change, lasting positive change using analytical and practical policy expertise. We've been historically linked and influenced by Oxford University, but we are not part of the university. There being 12 country office in Pakistan is the oldest country office. In Pakistan, we do large-scale evaluations where we bring our in-house survey capabilities along with our sectoral expertise. And SENSA is a good example where we used our third-party monitoring expertise coupled with our education sector expertise. We also implement large programs such as governance and PFM. We work with all major donors, FCDO in particular, which is, but apart from FCDO, we work with other organizations such as World Bank, UN organization, ADB, etc. And then I would wish everyone an enriching discussion this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Rauf Saab. May I now request Team Leader SENSA, Mr. Faisal Khan, and Monitoring Lead, Mr. Umar Naeem, to provide a brief introduction of the SENSA program.
I would just like to say that we felt it especially important in this moment of a global public health crisis and continuing wave of COVID-19 to focus our closing dissemination event on our education response, lessons, and experience to COVID-19 in our program. There is much more to SENSA and many other achievements and activities. There's a lot of documentation that we have, and we will be sharing that as well with our peers participating here today and larger stakeholders. Omar and I will briefly go through the background of the SENSA, its activities, and sort of set the context for the rest of the presenters to share. So the SENSA program started in July 2016 with the support of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. The program supports 3 NGOs to provide a full cycle of primary education for up to 52,000 of Sindh's poorest children, with a focus on out-of-school children in marginal, neglected areas of Sindh. The 3 NGOs include HAND Citizens Foundation and Family Education Services Foundation. Together, the work of SENSA supported NGOs cover districts of Karachi, Hyderabad, and Sakkar in case of the urban areas, as well as rural districts of Thatta, Tanduwala Yard, Kambar, and Khairpur. Each NGO has a different approach towards learning and teaching. Today, I'm going to emphasize 4 key elements that were very important in designing our COVID-19 response. And my colleagues later on are going to take you through many of their experience and implementing those interventions. One of the key areas that was very important to us was adaptive programming. The level of uncertainty, both in terms of a new disease, government measures and responses, and response of the public created a scenario where we did not know when schools would open. We were, particularly in the case of HANDS, largely involved in designing their COVID-19 response.
So with regards to the objectives of monitoring as to why we did what we did. So the overarching objective of SENSA monitoring was to improve the service delivery of the program and to improve what the objective of the SENSA was. So the basic objective of the monitoring that we did was to understand about students' attendance and their enrollment, to understand how even in one school, one teacher school, when students have no incentive, no monetary incentive to come to school and they're out of school children, how their attendance and enrollment will behave. So our part was to do that, and since they were studying in those one class school, we had to assess that how was the facilities that are provided to them, and how is the learning environment that is given to them, and if it is conducive to the learning objectives that are set out in the SENSA objectives. Furthermore, as we transition towards distance monitoring in the last part of SENSA, when the pandemic hit and all of the students were doing the homeschooling, schooling from home. So we were observing that the packages that were prepared by HANDS or FESL, did they actually reach those students, and if the students are benefiting from those packages, and if the teachers are constantly engaging with them or not. And after that, our objective is also to assess an annual assessment of the student learning outcomes using the assessment tools that are provided by ITA, Idara Talim wa Agahi. And lastly, we also help HANDS with their post-graduation and transition towards higher grades. So these are the main objectives that were embedded with SENSA monitoring. So traditionally, we were doing a face-to-face monitoring exercise throughout the SENSA program when the schools were open and students were going to the schools. So we would go and our data collectors would go to the schools, and they would collect the data of students that were a sample of students for hands and full-scale assessment for FESF. They would just collect the data on their mobile tablets about students' enrollment and their attendance, and some data about teacher turnover and teacher attendance. So this was a bi-monthly exercise in the beginning, but later it got to a monthly exercise. The outcome which we got from this exercise were the total enrollment in SENSA program. But however, since we were only doing a sample of schools each month per hands, so we would provide a extrapolated number with a margin of error that would give FCDO an idea about that how many students are currently in SENSA program and what is their attendance and everything. But since, as you know, that because of COVID-19, everything shut down and students were forced to study in their schools. Enhance did their Kitab Kahani, and FESF also came up with their own distance learning initiative. OPM also adapted to this change, and we changed our monitoring strategy from face-to-face monitoring to a phone-based monitoring. However, since our main objective was to assess the attendance, but in phone monitoring, you cannot assess the attendance.
Thank you, Umar and Faisal, for giving us an overview of the SENSA program. Moving on, now we'll be discussing about the TCS response plan.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mariam, and I've been a part of TCF for a few years now. TCF did a bunch of things for distance learning and support during COVID. I'll be talking about a few of them today. We came up with a four-pronged approach, and what we decided to do was that we wanted to sustain the movement. We didn't want to pause what TCF was doing. We wanted to engage students at home, and we wanted to prepare for school reopening in a manner that when students come back, the schools are safe for them, both physically and emotionally, and that was important for us. And the last was to support our communities throughout the pandemic. And we aimed to instill some joy while still trying to keep the kids connected with some form of learning. The show was called Ilm Ka Aangan, and all of these were theme-based episodes. For our storytelling bits in the TV show, Sania Said was generous enough to collaborate with us, and our Kahani Auntie Sania was a great hit. So the TV show contained, it wasn't just about stories. Each episode had a physical exercise segment as well. As I had mentioned, all our stories were TCF designed, and these were stories that were designed keeping in mind things like civic sense, confidence, critical thinking, the ability to question, curiosity, imagination, and all of these were themes that kids could relate with, so they were super contextualized. However, as I had mentioned, that not all kids have access to digital content. Even though for digital material, TV seems like the best option, we decided to go with something offline as well, so that all of our students could benefit from something. That was when we started publishing our first edutainment magazine, which was designed, it had two versions initially, primary and secondary. There were about 158,000 copies per issue that were distributed, and the frequency was 1 to 2 issues per month. The third piece of our engagement program was a volunteer program called Ilmojala, and this was a community-based study group sort of a thing where we matched some community tutors, as we call them, or our own alumni who volunteered to be tutors, with 5 to 7 students. The social and emotional well-being part was also super important for us. We introduced a couple of activities to ensure that something is done for their well-being when the schools are reopened. and that we can foster some resilience as well. We did student development and well-being activities. We designed a booklet of activities which schools did weekly, so that students could feel better and were more energized. There were also regular staff circles that were done to make sure the teachers are also doing all right.
One of the key partners in SENSA program is the Family Education Services Foundation, which is dedicated to improving quality education for deaf children.
And when we considered what we could do to help our deaf children, we were faced with a huge hurdle in that regard, because our kids need their input in sign language, which is a very face-to-face visual type of education. It's not something that can just be done through printed matter. We were very concerned as well about the erosion of their language skills. When our deaf children come to school, they're surrounded not just by their teachers, but by their peers. And there's a very rich and nurturing environment where everyone is communicating. When our deaf children are at home, they're very isolated. Their families, for the most part, are not conversant in sign language. I mean, we do have a parent program where we've taught basic sign language skills, which are fine for basic survival, but for an ongoing situation that's happened over the past year with the pandemic, our children were very isolated in their homes, left out of most conversations. And because they weren't utilizing their sign language skills, it's very easy to lose them. Just to give a little perspective here, and the video pointed this out, you know, there's over 1 million deaf children in Pakistan, and hardly 5% actually have access to school programs. And the majority of those school programs exist only in the urban areas, Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad. Yet in the rural areas, there's very few programs available. Even more than perhaps the academic facet was just to create awareness content for the deaf community at large. When we talk about 1 million deaf children, you can double that number or even triple it when you're talking about the number of deaf adults that are there across the country, most of whom were pretty much left out of the loop when it came to gaining sufficient information and understanding about COVID. So we developed some awareness and safety videos. There you see Mrs. Marine Abrar, our principal, whose father, host of the PTV show Bolt the Hot many years ago, and she's carrying on his legacy. These were done in partnership with the Sindh and the Punjab governments, and were very effective. We were also able to participate in the teleschool program, Ilm Ka Angan, which Marim just discussed, as we were able to interpret a number of the stories in sign language, which were then broadcast nationally. The first thing we did was a 1-month pilot program where we were given a donation of very low-cost laptops, these 1 laptop per child type laptops. And we loaded them with sign language stories and distributed them across our schools, and did a test group of around 250 students. There were English-based stories in sign language. We had a fantastic response. There was a lot of engagement. We saw that this had a lot of potential. So then, with the funding provided by DFID, that organization formerly known as DFID, we were able to then develop curricular content across 4 subjects: English, math, science, and Urdu. Keeping in mind again that all this had to be filmed with the teacher presenting the content in sign language. So we set up an in-house studio. We set up one in Karachi, one in Rashidabad at our 2 campuses. Our teachers had to create the lesson plans, then create the presentation and stand in front of the camera and sign it. And that also was a learning curve for many and had its own inherent challenges, but we managed to do it. But the point was, we could not put this online our kids needed devices. So we did a campaign to our donors, and a very generous donor in the UK sponsored 1,000 low-cost laptops. We got refurbished Lenovo and Dell laptops for around $50 each, which were in good working condition. We got them from a local warehouse. We tested each one. We made sure to select the ones that, cull out the ones that didn't work. And thus we were able to provide, and then we loaded all this content, the curricular content, on the laptop, and we're able then to distribute it to our children. We did it via an orientation session. We called the parents in with their children in small groups in each of our campuses to maintain COVID SOPs. And we did an orientation for the parents and students on how to utilize the laptops, how to access the content. Our students were already computer literate because all of our schools focus on IT from grade 1 and up. They all have an IT lab. But the parents, for the most part, had never seen or used a laptop in their life. And it was a great learning curve for them because we wanted them involved in their children's education at home. We needed their support. And they rose to the occasion, to their credit. Just to explain, we weren't able to film months and months of content at one time. We could only do 1 month at a time. So we provided month 1, and then in the following month, during that month, we were filming the content for month 2. And then our teachers would actually go in our school vans and deliver that content on a USB to the students in their homes.
It is very interesting to note the synergies between TCF and FESF's response plan. Moving on, a large component of the SENSA program is the non-formal education model of community schools that is being implemented by HANDS, a multidimensional NGO working in neglected areas of Sindh.
So the HANDS distance learning initiative had 3 components. Obviously, there's student learning, there's training, that's a part of any education intervention, and then there was also engagement with the SENSA communities. But each thing had to take on a new spin. The student learning had to have readers, much like TCF had readers for students, because we realized that our students not only were not on the digital grid, but also where they lived, they did have television ownership, but not in the communities where we had schools. The cable operators were not airing the PTV channel. So all we had to fall back on was the teacher-student interaction through phone calls, because 88% teachers and 85% student households did have cell phone ownership. So there were level readers, the supplementary reading material that was sent to them at home, and then using that, the teachers would make phone calls, follow up, explain difficulties, and check for understanding. And then there was training of trainers and training of teachers, all using WhatsApp, because 67% of our teachers did have smartphones. Those who didn't were able to purchase them. Those who were not able to purchase them could sit in groups of 2 with others who had them and respond to training content and participate in it like that. Teachers, what did they learn? And more importantly, what did we learn about how they learn? So you can see in this image here, there are 3 key parts. There's the skills that they learned. So there are skills for teaching, pedagogical skills and subject matter knowledge is always there. And then there were also the auxiliary skills that just happened to be evolve by way of chance, because they were needed for these online trainings and for teachers to make phone calls to parents in order to access the students. The teachers gained confidence, they learned, so they got a little more fluent in the use of technology. They had the smartphones, but somehow they hadn't used all their functions as much as they got a chance to do now. So this was how skills were developed. Then new roles, how senior teachers were identified, the well-performing ones, and they were asked to become trainers. Problem-solving initiative was seen both in teachers and in the managers. And most importantly, everything happens in a cultural context, and cultural norms were somehow not favoring women using cell phones the whole day, even if it was to attend a training or to make phone calls to children. So how that was one small barrier and how that had to be passed. and how that led to empowerment of all these women involved, because around over 90% of our staff is females. Our main learning was that high-tech digital access is not really a prerequisite, and if we think creatively, we can find other solutions as well. It's great if we can find the resources for digital devices, but the areas that we are working in, like I said, even the PTV channel was not being broadcast. Even the mobile phone operators, the telcos are not providing digital access. So there's so many challenges. So in that situation, high-tech solutions do work and have been seen to work through the HANDS SENSA program. Cultural norms should definitely be taken into consideration, taken seriously. It's better to over-plan rather than to under-plan. If you think that this might be a slight problem, it's better to take it upfront and handle it by a communication plan to have that change of heart within the community, for example, for ladies to be using phones for an extended period of time, etc. For reaching parents who are not literate, text-based solutions, as I already said, the SMS messages did not work too well. There should either be some way of getting audio messages to them or something that's based on images. So that would work better. Student learning material, as we have seen through all the presentations, child-friendly content is more effective. Textbooks need not be bookish. You can address the learning outcomes in simple language, in easily accessible language as well, because a lot of times the people who develop textbooks are overqualified for this task, in the sense that they think they're talking to somebody their own age. So a lot of times it's very difficult to plow through. It's really dense, the content for children, whereas that is not required. You write for children the way you speak to children so that they understand. If they want to learn about the water cycle, the important thing is that they learn about the water cycle, not that they learn complex sentence structures while learning about the water cycle, for example. So that is our learning from this. And from about teachers, as we already said, community-based schools should employ teachers from the locality. So many benefits of that, because they have that buy-in. They're located within the community. They are motivated to make a difference. They're not looking for external rewards, and they have that intrinsic motivation, that pro-social motivation that can work in the favor of the program. IT skills should be a foundational course or a foundational skill that's taught in pre-service and all in-service teacher education, because that really makes a difference. You essentially, it's a bit of a cliche term when you say you have to teach people how to learn. You're not just teaching them, you're teaching them how to learn so they can learn themselves. And that's equally important for teachers to do that so they can learn themselves. And also it should be something integrated across courses. It should not be a course in the second semester and that's the end of it. It should be integrated across all studies, all, for example, B.Ed programs, etc. Because otherwise, the more you practice it, the more proficiency and confidence you gain on it. And if you have a task that you're doing using IT skills, then that's how you develop the proficiency and confidence. And most importantly, adults should be trained following the principles of andragogy, allowing for some flexibility, allowing for self-learning, assigning tasks before the training, assigning tasks after the training, making them responsible for their learning, and not following the principles that we use with children. In fact, now we're giving more and more freedom even to children as they grow older in making decisions about their own learning and becoming self-learners. So definitely that's important for adults as well. Now, having said that, all of us, FESF, TCF, so many other players, HANDS, all of us made these efforts to reach our students in these difficult times. But will this same approach be enough moving forward? As the pandemic becomes an endemic, can we rest on these laurels and say, okay, we did this once, we can do it again? For example, our outcomes are not really measurable. The ASA results do show a positive trend, but how can we make it more robust? How can we make the data more rigorous for it to be more reliable and for that to be made a foundation for further planning? What else can remote learning packs include? We had booklets and magazines. Should they have maneuverable? Should they have other things that children can use, hold with their hands and play around with and make some sense out of. What can be some low-cost ways of reaching children through these things and teaching them through these things? How can teachers be supervised better during remote learning? Because obviously classroom observation is a constant thing in hand schools, but now that could not be done. Only the OPM monitors were making phone calls to see if the content had been reached and if the students were receiving the phone calls from the teachers, but that's not the same as all the teachers being supervised, because OPM does a sample-based monitoring. So there are so many questions about how this can be perfected further moving forward, because as we know, the latest news is that schools are going to remain closed till April 11th, at least in Islamabad. I'm not sure about Sindh. So this seems to be a chronic problem now, and there need to be the solutions that work now need to be evolved further, and that needs to be looked into by the experts.
Assalamu alaikum, Bahut Shukriya for having me to give these closing remarks. I'm not actually in Pakistan right now. I am in the UK, but I've brought my Pakistan cricket shirt back with me and I'm wearing it with pride, as you'll see. So as Anam said, my name is James O'Donoghue. I am an education advisor with the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, based out of the British High Commission in Islamabad. I just want to say a big thank you to all of our SENSA implementing partners, to the OPM team led by Faisal, to the FES team led by Richard, the HANS team, Calendar and his team, and we heard from Aisha and Atia earlier, and also the TCF team and Hassan and his team there. I want to say a big thank you to everyone. You know, your work has put 50,000 children in school in Sindh, and has brought, you know, nearly a quarter of those so far, at least, in secondary school. And we know that transition into secondary school is a big challenge in Pakistan, and to get that number of children through not just completing primary school but transitioning into secondary school is an incredible achievement, and something which everyone that's been part of this program should be enormously proud of. The three that I'm going to talk about are the three sort of key lessons we can take away from running an education program in the time of COVID, and how you can take an education program and help it absorb and then respond to quite such a substantial shock that has been presented by all of the school closures from COVID-19. And the three things I'm going to talk about briefly are engagement with our parents and communities, the role of digital in delivering distance and remote learning, and then the necessity to adapt and be flexible. These are three things that all of their partners have spoken to directly this morning. So the first point is around engagement, community, parental engagement, engagement with children, engagement with our teachers. This came through very, very strongly in all of the presentations. It's common to all of the partners, and it feels like, listening to what has been said today and listening to what the partners have told us over the previous few months, there's almost a sort of an interesting irony here, which is, due to school closures, we may have seen our children less. We may have had less direct FaceTime with our students, but it feels like all of the partners have got to know their students, their parents, and their communities much better. And that has come across very strongly, actually. It's almost an unintended consequence and a benefit, actually, of COVID, which is, while of course all the partners, you know, work well with their communities before, I think the school closures, because of the pandemic, really gave the impetus to understand our students' parental, family and community context to an even greater level of detail, so that the responses could adapt accordingly. We heard about TCF engaging families and how FESF oriented parents on the new technology, about HANS, frequent phone-based engagement with parents. And I think, you know, this is a lesson which is relevant not just for responding to shocks within the education sector, but it's a key and core and fundamental part of our work as educators and educationalists more generally. And as I said, of course, this work was being done before, but I think COVID meant it was done with a greater sense of urgency, a greater sense of attention, and a greater sense of a greater amount of thought into how we can really understand our parents and our communities, because that fundamentally is the context that the kiddies are coming from, and is even more important in the period of COVID. and it it throws up really interesting nuances that need to be managed, as Richard was saying about sensitizing on the use of the technology, or as Aisha and Ati were talking to us about overcoming the particular sort of cultural sensitivities around engaging with families, and the means through which you engage with parents and families. I think this is an incredibly important benefit, actually, of these school closures that we must keep hold of, capture and take forward into our future work. And I think this is a lesson that all education programs and implementers should really double down on moving forward as we recover from COVID and things return to some form of normality, or the new normal. It will help our education programs be more efficacious, certainly, but also more resilient to future shocks. We talk about COVID being a once in a century pandemic. I think it's a bit too early in this century to be stating that, and I suspect, within our lifetimes, and certainly within our students' lifetimes, something like this may come along again. And I think this is that kind of learning that can help us become more resilient in the future. So that's point number one about engagement. Point number two is around the role of digital. We've heard a lot today about the use of digital mechanisms, digital platforms for delivery of remote and distance learning. And I think what we've heard is that digital is a bit of a double-edged sword. We've heard about its great benefits, but we've also heard about its limitations. We know that there is a big digital divide in Pakistan. That exists globally, but in Pakistan in particular, it's particularly acute. And we heard some of the statistics earlier about that. Only approximately 1 million school-age children having regular access to some form of digital device. So I think what's been really good, and which is what I think we should promote from this programme as it closes, is that the implementing partners we heard from today have really had to roll up their sleeves and figure these problems out in real time, and how to deliver education to real children on a daily basis. The global education community has sort of pivoted the global education discourse to the role of digital and ed tech and e-learning, and that's all great, and that is important and will become increasingly more important moving forwards. But actually, in the here and now, we can talk in as much high-blown language as we want about ed tech and that being the future, but that doesn't help the child who is trying to finish their education, their primary school career in interior Sindh. And I think we've heard some really good stories of how digital has been harnessed for its benefits and its potency, but it has been complemented by some, much more low-tech interventions, which ultimately, I think, for the here and now, will be more effective and be more impactful. We heard about Ilm Kaangan from TCF and Kitab Gihani from Hands. These are really good, solid paper-based materials which can continue to be used and still hold value. And so I think we need to just be mindful that we don't drop non-digital solutions moving forwards. And having said that, of course, we also need to embrace the opportunities that digital provides us. And I think a really interesting learning point from this, particularly from Hans, our last presenters, was how the promise of digital for them was realised not so much through direct delivery to the children, but through delivery of training to their teachers once they had identified and overcome certain cultural sensitivities around that. But there was some really interesting learning and feedback and sort of anecdotal case studies coming back that amongst the largely female workforce of the Hands schools, or the totally female workforce of the Hands schools, some of the digital training spaces that were created by Hands were felt to be more inclusive, were felt to be more accessible. And there was some fascinating feedback where teachers said they felt they were getting more constructive input into their training because they had the time and the space to ask questions. They had the time and the space to think about what it was they were being trained in before applying it. And so I think that, that is a really good nudge for us all to think about the more holistic role of digital moving forward in education. Yes, that may well include putting a tablet in front of a child, and we heard from Richard and FESF earlier about how that was so important because of the medium through which they need to communicate with their children. But we also heard about how, okay, digital potential can be harnessed to the objective of teaching children, even if it isn't itself the primary mechanism through which we deliver the content and the instruction to the children. And I think that's a really nuanced point that I think we as a education community globally and in Pakistan, we need to, again, harness and take forward into the new normal, as it will continue to be difficult to do in-person meetings and gather together for training. I think we have some really, really strong lessons to take forward. And my final, third and final sort of cross-cutting reflection on what we've heard today is around the fundamental necessity of being able to adapt and be flexible. That was a constant theme throughout all of the presenters, and it reminded me of a phrase which I think has been attributed to many people over the years, but it's something along the lines of fail fast, fail often, learn faster. And I think, you know, at the start of this, no one could claim to have known what the answer was. No one could foresee the oscillating nature of the school closures. And in that environment of uncertainty, we need to be adaptable, we need to be flexible, we need to plan properly, certainly, and we heard Aisha talk about, you know, over planning in certain areas can be helpful because you're covering your bases, absolutely. But throughout this program over the last few months, we've heard from implementers and from the OPM team working with our implementers around the sort of the usefulness of a scenario-based approach, where you say, you know, okay, we don't know what's going to happen, but our best guess it's going to be one of these three scenarios, and we'll sort of work up ideas which are just about good enough, acknowledging that we can't think through everything. At a given time, we'll stand up, or we'll put into place a particular course of action, and we'll run with it, and we'll fail quickly, and we'll learn from it, and then we'll adapt and we'll go again. And I think it's exhausting and it's relentless, but I think all of the SENSA implementing partners have demonstrated an incredible innovativeness and an incredible resilience to keep piloting, doing short pilots, gathering information really quickly, changing what they're doing, improving what they're doing, and then going again, acknowledging that even then it's not going to be perfect, and the next month it'll be that bit better, and next month it'll be that bit better. That was a very clear theme over the course of today's presentations, and again, I think this is something which, moving forward into some form of new normality, we should keep hold of and harness to our future efforts, because we already know that education in Pakistan faces numerous substantial challenges, and there has been talk over a good number of years, and you are all far more well versed in it than I am, around, you know, almost everything's been done in Pakistan, and the needle is not being moved as much as we think it should just yet. But I think the great opportunity presented by COVID is that we have now had a year of innovation, adaptation, trial and error from which to learn from. And I think, you know, certainly we as the High Commission and the FCDO's education team want to really learn from that and apply that to our future programming. And I know that the SENSA implementing partners that we've heard from today will continue to do that even after the SENSA program closes. So yeah, I'll finish there. They're my three overarching reflections around the vital importance of engaging with our community, and COVID's provided us an even better opportunity to do that. The sort of Janus-based nature of digital learning solutions and their great potential, but also acknowledging and working within their limitations, and the ability to adapt, flex, fail quickly, learn fast, and have the resilience to keep doing that over an extended period of time. So I'll finish there, and just say one more big thank you to everyone who's presented on the call today, and for much more importantly to everyone for their work over the past 4 years on this SENSA programme. Thanks very much.